Good evening and welcome. Tonight we'll be going over the history and geography of Yemen. I just want to say real quick couple disclaimers. First of all, I'm getting over a migraine right now. I have chronic migraine, so I'm used to this, but the phase of the migraine I'm in right now, it sometimes makes me slur my words or forget words. So if I have a moment where I just pause in the middle of a sentence, don't worry, I'm fine. I promise you. But I might forget some important things, so we'll see, I guess. And also, Yemen is going through quite a lot right now. Of course, we'll talk about it in the history section, but I really don't want any disparaging comments about the country or the Yemenis civilians who are struggling to survive right now. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that, but I don't even want any silly jokes or anything about it because it's truly, truly devastating. So please be respectful. Remember, there are no bad countries, only bad leaders. And with that being said, let's get into the geography section. Yemen is absolutely fascinating. Let's start off on the coast. The coastal area here is known as the Tihama, and it's a pretty flat, fertile sort of area, mostly thanks to the wadis you can see over here. Wadis are streams or lakes, any kind of flowing water that fills up during the rainy season and dries out completely during the dry season. So they are not permanent rivers. Yemen has no permanent rivers or lakes. So the wadis have been used very cleverly as methods of irrigation for farming. So the coastal area has been pretty good for things like that. Also, it's very important that it's situated around these bodies of water. This is the Red Sea. This is the Gulf of Aden. Up here is the Suez Canal. And even before the Suez Canal was built, these were very important shipping areas that had a point of access to Southeast Asia, India, and Southern Africa, and then would travel by caravan up into the rest of the world. So the coastline here has always been extremely significant, not to Yemen's history, but to world history. The largest one is Aden right here. There's also Hodeidah, which is going to be important in its history. Same with Aden, but you'll see. But the one I want to point out to you is right here. This is where the first coffee beans and coffee in general were first produced and sold around the world. For a while, it was the only place until Europeans managed to smuggle the trees out to put it in their colonies. And you can see here it's called mocha, as in mocha. If you want to know just how important these coastal farming port cities are, it's what mocha's named after. And you know what's interesting, because I used to think that coffee production first began down in Ethiopia, Kenya, which is just down here. But this part of the world used to be attached to that part of the world. It's separated here. So there's a lot of similarities in terms of flora and fauna and landscape in general. So they have the same kind of coffee trees. Let's see, let's move on to the mountainous area up here. These are some pretty high mountains. In fact, the highest point in the Arabian Peninsula is right here. It's Jabal Anabi Shuyaib, which I hope that's how you pronounce that. And it's right next to the capital city of Sana'a. There's lots of very important cities in this area. And that's because these mountains help create very deep wadis, which people have been widening and deepening throughout history so that they get fuller and fuller and create fertile valleys and fertile plateaus as well. That's why there's lots of cities in this mountainy area in particular. moving on to the rest of mainland Yemen. Whenever I mention the highlands, I'm talking about this area. This area appears generally referred to as the highlands, but the coastal area is historically known as the Hadramaut, which was the ancient kingdom that existed here. And as you can see, lots of wadis and lots of towns right here, which these towns are famous for date palm farming. There we go. You can also see a lot of towns along this huge wadi right here. Same thing as the rest of Yemen. It's been irrigated and cultivated, I suppose, for so long that permanent settlements can be established along it, even though the water isn't permanent. There's some really beautiful UNESCO World Heritage sites in Yemen, but my favorite is Shibam. I'll link a video down below because I was just so taken away by how beautiful this town is, and I'm so glad that it's being preserved because it's remarkable. It's called the Manhattan of the desert. It has skyscrapers. Like, I'm not kidding. It's really cool. Skyscrapers that are like thousands of years old, basically. Then up here, you can see all these dots up here. This is part of the Rub al-Khabi. Did I say that right? The Rub al-Khabi. It's written right here. Rub al-Khali. Okay. The Rub al-Khali. And we'll flip through this book after history, of course. The Rub al-Khali is known as the empty quarter. Should have just stuck with that, but whatevs. And it is called the empty quarter because it is empty. There is nothing there. It is sand. In parts of the empty quarter in Yemen, there are Bedouins that live there, but Bedouins famously don't settle. They are nomadic people, so they traverse through the desert like they've done for thousands upon thousands of years. So there's things there just not like you wouldn't go there on vacation to sightsee. There's literally nothing there. Then we have the islands of Yemen. Yemen has quite a lot. There's a bunch here in the Red Sea. The largest is Comoran, which is right here. There's also the Hanish Islands down here, and lots of little bitty tiny ones all throughout here. And these are volcanic islands. As you can imagine, this corner of Africa / Arabia is very volcanic. It's the beginning of the Great Rift Valley of Africa, where Africa is being ripped apart and the volcanic activity is crazy. So these are volcanic islands. Nothing like boom boom volcanoes. What's the word I'm looking for? Active volcanoes. There we go. No boom booms, but volcanic nonetheless. But the most famous and most incredible island is Socotra down here. It's also UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and out of all of the beautiful things I've discovered in Yemen, this is by far the most interesting. Socotra is called the Galapagos of the Indian Ocean. It has so many endemic species of plants and animals, and they are just absolutely bizarre. They look like they are from another planet. Like, not even just like Mars or something, from like planet Göbel-Gleck of the Göbekli galaxy. Like, it looks like it's so beyond anything you can comprehend with these absolutely bizarre plants that grow there. The most famous being the dragon's blood tree, which we'll see pictures of in here. And like, it's literally stuff that like Dr. Seuss wouldn't even come up with. It's the most bizarre, wacky looking island, and it's really neat. It has quite a good flourishing tourist industry, even though the people here speak Socotran. They don't really speak Arabic like the rest of Yemen, and they have their own ways that they've been doing for forever. So it's a very strange, unique place, and I think that's really awesome. Meanwhile, up here in Yemen, the borders are very important. It borders Saudi Arabia up here, which is a little contentious because this area, this is Asir, this is Najran, And then right above Asir is Mecca. Those all used to be part of what was called Greater Yemen back in antiquity. So just keep that in mind. And then there's also the border here with Oman, which, if you know my channel, you know I say that Mother Nature doesn't make straight lines like this. It's a man-made division. And that's mostly because there's just not a lot there to delineate the border anyway. So you gotta draw the line somewhere. It's also why I'm covering up part of Yemen with the book. There's really nothing there. So that is the geography of Yemen. Absolutely fascinating. Let's get into its history, which is so fascinating. I've spent a lot of time, usually I take 3-4 days to research. I've taken 8 to research Yemen just because I keep learning so many cool things about its history. So I'm going to try to condense it best I can. I'm obviously not going to fit everything in there. Even some of my favorite bits of Yemeni history, I'm going to cut for time. So we'll come back to Yemen eventually. And I'll have a whisper video for Yemen tomorrow as well. So anyway, this is one of those places in the world that people have existed there for forever. Settlements were believed to be first formed in the mountains here around 5000 BCE. The most famous ancient settlement by far would have been Saba, which you can see the ruins of right here. Amran was the next great city that popped up after it started to decline, but there were 4 major kingdoms throughout Yemen. Saba was consistently the most powerful. They each kind of had their turn at being top dog, but Saba was the most, consistently powerful. It was also referred to as Sheba in the Old Testament of the Bible, and I believe in the Quran as well. It might be called Sheba, but it's spelled very differently and pronounced very differently. As in the Queen of Sheba, to go see King Solomon. That's where this was. And by the 11th century BCE, this was the hop-in place to be in this corner of the world. And they became very, very wealthy because of the trade that they had. Yemen was very wealthy in frankincense and myrrh, which a lot of cultures up there in Europe, Middle East, Mesopotamia, Israel, so on and so forth, really loved frankincense and myrrh. They used it in a lot of religious things and what have you. The Egyptians used it for mummification. There's a million uses. And ancient Yemen became very profitable because of that. They also made the irrigation that I mentioned before. And they created the Great Dam of Marib in 940 BCE here in Amran, which was an ancient site that was destroyed. And archaeology suggests that it was destroyed by rats. But of course, it was a whole argument over who destroyed the dam, blah, 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 fights and wars. But anyway, it was apparently destroyed by rats. But anyway, things changed quite quickly. Well, in terms of history, it was over time, but it mainly had to do with Christianity, to be honest. The Romans converted to Christianity, and sorry for the dog, it's really distracting. Anyway, the Romans converted to Christianity. They didn't use frankincense and myrrh anymore. The Egyptians' civilization collapsed. They didn't mummify people anymore, and they didn't need the frankincense and myrrh, and the want for those resins dried out. Also, a lot of people discovered the sea route that Yemen had been using, and a lot of other countries just started using that to get to India and Southern Africa, what have you, and not having to rely on it going through to Yemen and then traveling up to where they were. They just figure out how to sail down. So that's dried that up. There was also the growth of other kingdoms, dynasties, empires, what have you. Mainly at this point it was the Himyarites. There's been something in my throat for hours, and it's trying to wiggle its way out. I think it's a piece of cilantro. My nemesis. I hate cilantro. Anyway, the Himyarites took over, and that was the end of the glorious Saba kingdom. Christianity began to spread throughout Yemen very slowly but surely, and there was a very sizable Jewish population in the area as well, and there was a lot of ethnic conflict. And it got pretty out of control. There were a lot of people dying. So the Byzantine Empire now up there in Constantinople teamed up with the Aksum Empire, which was in Ethiopia, to attack and invade and take over the region. This wasn't the first time this happened. The ancient Romans actually attempted to invade way back in the BCE times, but it wasn't very successful. They retreated in shame. So when this happened, the people here were like, oh my gosh, like we're finally being invaded for reals, and we need some help. So they reached out to the Persians, who at this time was the Sassanid Empire, and they helped kind of chase out the Byzantines, and in doing so annexed the area for the Sassanid Empire. Then in 630, the Prophet Muhammad, up in Mecca, just up there, sent out a bunch of his family members throughout the area to spread the good news about Islam. And quite a few of his cousins, I think, came into Sana'a and Aden and various other parts. And the people here gladly converted. I think there had just been a lot of religious tension, and it's, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm trying to imagine, like, living here with someone coming and saying, hey, my cousin is a prophet of this religion. We really want you to convert. And all you have to do is just, say there is no God but Allah. You have to worship certain holidays and fast. You have to give to the poor, and you have to, travel to Mecca. Just explaining the rules, and them being like, yeah, that sounds great. Like, you get a road trip. We give to the poor so we don't waste food. It just makes sense. So the people here very, quickly converted to Islam and really took to it and helped the Arab takeover of most of this corner of the world. Yemeni soldiers traveled up into Iraq. They traveled up through North Africa and even into Spain, helping to take over in the name of Islam. Now, there are two sects of Islam, main sects to this day, the Sunni and the Shia. And I've mentioned this before, how the difference is very slight. It's almost like Catholics and Protestants. They believe the same exact thing, just not. So Sunnis believe that, actually start with Shias. Shias believe that the only people who can properly preach Islam are descendants of the Prophet. Whereas the Sunnis believe that pretty much anyone can preach. It's very much like the Catholics believe that only the Pope has jurisdiction, whereas Protestants believe whoever can have jurisdiction, right? Kind of like that. The tension has existed since the schism happened, and it's very much ongoing in Yemen today. One such sect, they would eventually become a Shia-dominated sect, were the Zaydis. And the Zaydis lived in the highland areas. They originally started off in the mountainous area, but the highland people were the ones who really took to the movement, and the Zaydi population lived mostly out here, not so much over here. I really didn't find any evidence if they were Shia, but I know that the Zaydi movement was different than what was going on throughout the rest of Yemen, so I think that's what was happening. I think the rest was more Sunni, they were more Shia. So anyway, a lot of different dynasties would rise and fall in its early history. But I want to mention one ruler in particular, and that's Queen Arwa. And she ruled Yemen from 1087 to 1138. She's an extremely beloved figure, not just in Yemen, but in the Arab world in general. She was the only real Islamic queen, and she was a hero. She did a lot for the people. It was a really, really strong golden age. The Ayyubids attempted to conquer at one point. They came in, dealt with the Zaydis. The Zaydis said no and fought back, and eventually would drive the Ayyubids out. The Ayyubid leader in Sana'a appointed a general just to take over just for now, which he said as he fled. He claimed he was going to Mecca on pilgrimage, and he just never returned. So that general started his own new dynasty called the Rasulid dynasty, and this was easily the most prosperous golden age of Yemen in terms of education, architecture, learning, science, art, all those things. But eventually, once that dynasty weakened and fell, the next dynasty to come about wasn't very strong. A lot of these dynasties fell because there was no clear line of succession, so a lot of people would scramble after there was some great leader to take over, and it would all just fall apart. So that's what was happening after the rest of the dynasty fell. The next dynasty to come along was still scrambling, very, very weak, and the Mamluks up in Egypt saw that as an opportunity, a moment of weakness to dive in, and they took over very briefly. The Zaydis put up a big fight. Eventually, the Ottomans would conquer the Mamluks, which means the Ottomans soon came in to assert their dominance and spent the whole time attempting to conquer Yemen, fighting the Zaydis. Just don't mess with these people. They do not want to be conquered. And that would last from about 1538 to about the late 1700s or so. The Ottomans slowly but surely started to give up on Yemen, retreating ever so slightly, and other dynasties would come into power. Ottomans would splinter off and form their own dynasties in Yemen. It was quite a lot. But they really wanted to hold on to Yemen as tightly as they could, mainly because of the shipping routes, right? Not to mention the Portuguese were sailing up around this area, and they didn't want that to happen. They didn't want the Portuguese to start sinking their claws into this area. They had already started with India. Not to mention, like I said, Mecca was technically a part of Greater Yemen at that point, and they wanted to make sure they didn't lose Mecca to anyone, right? They wanted to control Mecca, the most holiest site in Islam. But the Zaydis said no and fought back as hard as they could. Meanwhile, in 1839, the British were in the area. They were controlling India. And they wanted to have a coaling station for their ships, like a good halfway point between up in Egypt and India. And they picked Aden. And the people here were like, yeah, no. At this point, it was the Labij dynasty. I think that was another splinter of the Ottomans. And they were in control. And they said, obviously not. Go away. Who even are you? So the British, I think it actually did happen. They claimed it happened, but I think it really did. Was that a British ship was attacked and sunk, I believe, off the coast of Aden. So Britain came in with all their forces, and they invaded and bombarded and attacked and convinced the kingdom, among all the other little dynasties in the area, that they needed British protection. So Aden became a protectorate. It was known as South Arabia, eventually become a colony of South Arabia. The Ottomans did not like this one bit. So in 1849, they returned and tried to take over the area again. And the territory of Yemen was very much split into north and south at this point, with the north being the Ottomans attempting to come in and assert control, and the south being the British, who already had control. And the area was actually being very prosperous. Aden was a worldly port city at this point. It had people from all over the world living there. So they're kind of doing their own thing. While up here it was a big Ottoman mess, mainly because of The Zaydis did not want the Ottomans there. The Ottomans found a way to circumvent this. By 1911, they actually signed a truce with the Zaydis that gave their current imam autonomous control of the area. And that kind of settled things for a while, but then the Ottomans wound up collapsing in 1918 anyway. So once that happened, the Zaydis were like, cool, so we have free reign over all of North Yemen, right? A lot of people there said, no, we don't want you to control us. So fighting broke out, and also with the British, because they obviously didn't want the British there to begin with. That happened throughout the 1920s and 30s. And eventually the movement up here would result in a civil war from 1962 to 1970. Just like I said, it was the line of succession thing, like people arguing over who should be the one to control everything next. It fell into a horrible civil war, but it ended with them undoing the whole concept of like a dynastic ruler, and they formed a republic. And that took over. In 1967, there was a big uprising in Aden. The British got spooked, and they started to pull out of the colony and eventually withdrew. And the area of South Yemen became a Marxist-Leninist state, like full support of the Soviet Union, all of that. Which, like I said in my Oman episode, if you have Muslims who are pro-communist, you have a problem, because communism and Islam are like oil and water. Speaking of oil, oil was discovered up here in the 1980s, kind of right on the line between North and South Yemen, which caused some disagreements, some wars. There's also a civil war down in the south, and eventually they both had the idea that we should just become one Yemen, and it took a while, but in 1990 it happened. North Yemen and South Yemen just became Yemen. And they agreed that the president of North Yemen would become the president of Yemen, and the president of South Yemen would be the vice president of Yemen. And the president was Ali Abdullah Saleh. Remember him. It wasn't a very stable government. There was just too many factors happening, a lot of unrest and a lot of conflict. Not to mention when Iraq invaded Kuwait, when Iraq invaded Kuwait up there, Yemen did not support the coalition to kick Iraq out of Kuwait, which Saudi Arabia was, and Saudi Arabia was not very happy about that, and they literally have not been very happy with Yemen since forever. It just kind of added to the list, but that was like the first modern reason why they weren't too happy about Yemen. All of that instability led to terrorists taking advantage and moving in and setting up shop, and there was a terrorist attack in Aden in 2000 on the USS Cole, an American ship, which sparked a movement, an American anti-Yemeni terrorist movement, which the government of Yemen was like, we don't support these people, we're friends with the US, we don't want them here either. But this terrorist group was Al-Qaeda. They would eventually join with the Al-Qaeda in Saudi Arabia to become super Al-Qaeda. No, they became Al-Qaeda of the Arab, I forget. Anyway, they created their own super Al-Qaeda and launched so many horrible attacks against the Yemeni people. I really don't want to say because I don't want YouTube to be like demonetized. But you can imagine with cars and, attacking prominent buildings and stuff like that. It's really horrible. And the U.S. retaliated by sending drone strikes into Yemen to attack the terrorists, but there was one instance where a drone attack hit a wedding party, killed a lot of people, including children, and obviously the Yemeni people were not happy about that. Understandable, too. That's a horrific thing to happen. But there are lots and lots of drone strikes from the U.S. at this point. In 2004, the Zaydi Shias formed a new sect called the Houthis, named after the current leader, who were just kind of sick of everything and just wanted things to be their way. They didn't want this unstable government and the drone strikes and interference from people who had nothing to do with Yemen. So they started to march toward the capital to take over. And there's a lot of conflict with President Saleh and the Houthis, which would be ongoing. And in 2011, the Arab Spring happened. Basically, a lot of Arab countries staged protests against their corrupt governments. And it really took off in Yemen, and the government did not act well. It was very messy, but it didn't lead to President Saleh resigning just because things got that bad. And he appointed his vice president as the president, but he was a very weak man who just didn't want to deal with the Zaydi conflict, so they walked all over him. They conquered Sana'a. Sorry for the car. They invaded Sana'a in 2014. The president had to move to Aden, where a lot of battles happened. He fled to Saudi Arabia. A coalition formed with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and various other countries to help stop the civil war. Saudi Arabia, in particular, blockaded the country so that no aid could get in, which led to a lot of starvation of the people here, a lot of hunger, and cholera as well. A lot of people could not get aid. Saudi Arabia bombed Yemen a lot, and they claim that the Houthis are being supported by Iran. And this goes back to the Sunni Shia thing, because the Houthis are Shia. Saudi Arabia is Sunni. Iran is Shia. Iran says, what, me? No, I don't support these people. We don't give them money and weapons. They just happen to have state-of-the-art missiles and drones and all of that. This little movement out in the desert. So it's a proxy war at this point being fought in Yemen. A lot of other terrorist groups moved in, like ISIL. The Houthis are fighting against them. Saleh wound up joining forces with the Houthis because he wanted to be reinstated, even though he was their old enemy. And once he changed his mind in 2017 and officially announced on TV that he didn't support the Houthis anymore, the Houthis executed him. Yikes, it's a lot. There's a lot of issues happening. The Houthi rebels have the port of Hudaida, and oil still comes in and out there with the agreement that that money is going to go toward the people who are starving. But it doesn't seem to be that way. It seems to be going toward the Houthi war effort. Most recently, there was a ceasefire in 2022, and it's about to expire, and it looks like nothing was really accomplished during that time. But thankfully, 2022 has been one of the more peaceful years in the Civil War, but there is no end in sight. It's very horrible. It's considered the worst humanitarian crisis on the planet, due to all of the suffering of the people of Yemen. So that is where we are today. And with that being said, let's flip through this book. I'm going to take a drink of water. You can't tell. I just got my voice back like this morning, so I'm getting used to having a voice again. Here's the book. Which, this architecture is so beautiful. These are some of the skyscrapers that I talked about. The old town of Sana'a, it literally looks like a fairy tale. It doesn't look real. It's so, so beautiful. Here's the flag of Yemen. Let's see. Oh, this is supposed to depict the Queen of Sheba visiting Solomon. and very sadly can see what this neighborhood looked like before the bombings and after. It's so sad. There's a big map. And this is on Socotra. These are some of the baobab trees that they have. Absolutely bizarre. Here's a good map of all of the different landscapes of Yemen that I mentioned. And here's a highland village, or not highland, like a mountainy village. It's so, this architecture just blows my mind. It's so beautiful. And he's at the wadi doing something, I'm not sure. Looks like he's writing or something. Look at this dust storm over the Red Sea. It's pretty intense. Here is the dragon's blood tree, right? Like, it's so bizarre looking, and it's called that because its sap is bright red like blood, and it gets chiseled out like resin and ground up to make a powder that's used in a lot of Eastern medicine. But these trees are wild. They grow from the mist. That's why all their leaves are up here. They collect the damp from the mist to send down to the thick trunks. Very, very strange trees. I'm obsessed with them. There's a little snaky on the next page, just a warning if you're sensitive to snakes. But first, here's a striped hyena, which is so cool. Hyenas are something you don't really associate with the Arab Peninsula, but there we are. And then here's the snaky. It's a desert viper. And look, it's got his eyelashes on. Alright, snake is gone. Here's a very sweet little hummingbird on Socotra. And then this is what I'm talking about. This is the old walled city of Sana'a. Look at this. It's absolutely gorgeous. This is one of the most beautiful cities I've ever seen. It does not look real. This looks like it's from a very elaborate children's illustrator. Like, it looks like a fairy tale. It's the only way I can describe it. It looks mythical. It's so beautiful. Here is Aden. It looks a lot more modern, mainly because the British occupied it for so long. And then it was a pro-Soviet state, so a lot of the buildings are made of, concrete and stuff like that. This is in Taiz, a very old marketplace. Let's see, another painting of the Queen of Sheba arriving at King Solomon's court. We have another depiction of the Queen of Sheba. This is the Al Saleh Mosque in Yemen. I think it's the presidential mosque, technically, and I'm not sure if it still exists in this capacity. I'm pretty sure it got bombed pretty bad. This is the Prince of Wales, 1875, meeting the Sultan of Lahish, forming his protectorate. A map of the British Empire at its height, and you can barely see Aden right there. It's very tiny. And here's the Suez Canal, which I probably should have mentioned before, how important that was. The British built the canal going through right here, so it became easier to trade through here. It really boosted the economy there in Aden. Let's see. A president in 1964. I think he's from North Yemen, I want to say. But anyway. And this is after South Yemen became independent. The British handed the country over, saying it's your mess now. The Suez Canal, it says. Interesting. And this is from the Arab Spring protests in 2011. And some Yemeni forces standing guard. 2011 also. And this is a Houthi rebel at the destroyed presidential palace. See, the mosque is right next to the palace. That's why I assumed that the mosque is probably very badly damaged as well. Anyway, here's another picture of the flag of Yemen. It's just so depressing. It's so sad because, let's see, this is in the Civil War in 94. Another thing I didn't mention. But that was because President Saleh tried to change the Constitution so he'd have more power. And I think this was when he decided he wanted to appoint his son to be the next president, which is not how presidents work. But it's just like, I discovered this beautiful place and I want to visit it so much, and it's going through so much turmoil. Anyway, this is the one of the leaders of like Yemen in exile with the Malaysian prime minister, apparently. A protest sign from the Muslim Brotherhood. Here are some terrorists being charged for war crimes. Here's President Saleh, which here it says the late President Saleh because he was executed. My goodness. There's a oil refinery. These are South Yemeni Guards, 1957. This is khat. Khat is an herb that is apparently very easy to grow, and when you chew it, it gives you hallucinogenic feelings. It makes you feel really good, but it doesn't do anything besides that. There's no nutritional value. You can't really use it in anything else other than recreation. So it's very profitable. It's very easy to grow, but it doesn't help anything at all. So there's a lot of discouragement from growing khat, but it's some ways that farmers make their profit, There's a fishing boat. Another beautiful tree on Socotra. This is an incense tree. Water has been one of the big issues in Yemen because, as you can imagine, they don't get a lot of water. They don't have any lakes or rivers, right? So when the Civil War started in 2015, water was the main issue. A lot of people going thirsty. Here's a dried out sewage swamp, which, yuck. It's one of the consequences of a war like this. Some traditional Yemeni clothes there for men. We're going to talk about these daggers in a minute. There's some better pictures later on in this book. And here's a Bedouin tent. And here's some Jewish Yemenis playing in 2005, it says. Very famously, in the 1960s, I want to say, the U.S. and Britain and Israel launched Operation Magic Carpet, where they literally airlifted as many Jewish people out of Yemen and just dropped them off in Israel. So I read on Wikipedia that there's only 50 Jews left in Yemen, but I'm sure that number's changed by now. Very interesting. Some tribal clothes there. Very interesting too. So yeah, this is their... Oh, I always forget the name of these. These really neat swords that they have. And they're mostly for like... to identify what family you're from. But it's an important part of the menswear. There'll be more pictures too. Wearing a dola, it says traditional clothes there for women, along with an abaya, face covering. This is very sad. It just upsets me a lot. Here's some rural people in their traditional clothes. And some rural children as well, looking very sweet in their traditional clothes. Very bright and colorful, huh? Lots of pinks, reds, and stuff. Here's a Yemeni wedding. There's the bride and groom. And here's some more of those ancient skyscrapers. I'm obsessed. It's so beautiful. And they were built like this. This whole bottom floor is just like storage or places for animals, and that's because they were invaded so often by so many things that they needed the extra protection. People live on the top floors. Everything else is just protection. And Getting a checkup there. And a medicine market. Interesting. Getting some traditional medicine. A gorgeous mosque. Beautiful, beautiful inlays. And doing some studying before some prayers. Reading the Quran. The obligatory picture of the Kaaba in Mecca. And all of these books. And I think they're doing the trip to Medina as part of the Hajj. It's a very complicated process. It's a very multi-stepped pilgrimage. A big old minaret there. And it's time for prayer. And an example of the language there. They speak Arabic. There's lots of like English or like Roman and Arabic script. This shows you what Arabic numbers look like. And some beautiful mosaic calligraphy. Reading the newspaper. This guy's got some really cool crafts for sale made out of brass. And some calligraphy above the shop here. This is in Hodeida. Some like modern architecture, which is still like old in today's standards, but compared to everything else, very new. Here it is, a jambia. There we go. I knew I was going to say it somewhere. They're traditional knives. There's an oud, a very popular instrument. And it is market day. Everyone's out shopping. Looks like we got some dates down there. Some camel races. And what else? So this is during Ramadan. Looks like they're sitting around studying. Probably waiting for the next hour of prayer for the sun to go down. And it's Eid al-Adha, so the sheep are not going to have a great time, but everyone else will. Food. Lots of, look at this. This is so much food, and this guy's just sitting there like, do you want some, you want some nuts? You want some grains? You want some spices? The traditional oven there being heated up. And there's honey. Yeah, another popular thing in the kind of like Hadramaut area. It's cultivated. Eating dinner together and making some bread. Yemeni spiced beans and chicken and potato. That looks good. And then one last map of Yemen and where Yemen is located in the world, right down there. So that is going to be it for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a very good night.